after the dust settled a little bit, there was time for me to reflect on the value of my time and how much time and work it took into this project. And, was it all worth it? It absolutely was in this case, 100% in my opinion. But it's really good to kind of be clear, I think, when you go into business about what you want to get out of it and whether that's, a little more freedom, whether that's a creative endeavor and some way to express yourself, or whether that is truly to, triple, quadruple your initial investment, whatever that is, just to be clear about it. We jumped into this head first, and I didn't have a clear vision of what we wanted to do, but it was 100% exactly what we should have done at the time.
Support for this show comes from Exit Factor. Exit Factor offers a proven method that helps small to mid-sized business owners maximize their company's value. Through one-to-one consulting services and online programs, the trusted advisors at Exit Factor teach entrepreneurs how to successfully navigate and fully leverage strategies when buying, building, and selling their companies. Participants that follow the program have experienced considerable results, with some increasing business value as much as 57% in 1 year. It's time to start running your business every day like you are going to sell it. Learn more at exitfactor.com/pod. Now enjoy How I Sold.
Welcome to How I Sold, presented by Exit Factor. Only 13% of all businesses in the U.S. are sold, but we only hear about the billion-dollar stories. Here we explore the real-life stories of entrepreneurs and business owners like you that were able to build, grow, and sell their small businesses. Now, here is your business exit expert, #1 best-selling author, and host, Jessica Fialkovich.
Welcome to How I Sold. I'm Jessica Fialkovich, and I created this podcast after spending over a decade in mergers, acquisitions, and exits, and noticing we often hear the stories of the unicorn sales. Those companies valued over $1 billion. But we don't hear the real life stories. The stories of entrepreneurs, thousands of them every year, that build, grow, and sell their small business. These are their stories. And today on the show, building a brand and a movement. Ali Elman, an entrepreneur with experience in hospitality, coffee, and the M&A world, joins us and she shares her journey. Ali used her experience in working in California, Aspen, and New York to collect thoughts on branding and how you can use a brand to build a movement. Today, we hear just one of those stories through her journey of building and selling Black Eyed Coffee, a cult coffee bar that was on the leading edge of the independent coffee shop movement in Denver, Colorado. This conversation includes a ton of tactical takeaways in the areas of branding, marketing, and PR, and how you can use them in the early days of your business to build something that is ultimately valuable and sellable.
Hi, welcome back, everybody. And this week on How I Sold, I have a good friend of mine, a current business partner, but we'll get into that later, Ali Elman. She was the founder of Black Eyed Coffee, and she's going to tell us about her story today. Ali, welcome, and thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Jessica. I'm happy to be here.
So I don't go too much into your bio because we're going to really talk about your whole story from the very beginning. So let's start back at the very beginning. Where is Ali from? Where did you grow up? Where were you raised?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in a little town called Santa Barbara in California. It's a little beach town. And growing up, I was always at the beach or with horses or any around any sort of animal possible. Outdoors all the time.
Nice. And what did your parents do? Did you grow up in an entrepreneurial household, or what was the background of your parents' careers?
Yeah, so my father was a doctor. He was an anesthesiologist. My mom raised four of us, so she had a full-time job. But yeah, my parents, one thing that I got from them was they were always hosting. So they always had a lot of people over to our house all the time. It was very lively. And from a very small age, I just was drawn to hosting and hospitality, and I would create little menus and try to host our company and bring them crackers and cheese and things like that. So from a young age, I was just kind of drawn to hospitality in general.
Wow. Well, that'll tie into your story too. I'm not surprised by
Yeah.
that based on being at your house, even for just simple happy hours.
Yeah.
So grew up in Santa Barbara. How was school for you? Were you a dedicated student, or what was school like for you?
I was actually a dedicated student. I was always harder on myself than my parents were on me, and I pushed myself to do well in school. It was an important thing for me. Of course, it meant a lot to both of my parents, but I was pretty self motivated as a kid. So yeah, I was focused on it. I liked doing a lot of extra schoolwork as well, and did soccer and things like that after school.
So you've got school going on, you've got soccer, horses, outdoor stuff. So what did Allie think she was going to be when she grew up, when you were this age? Like what was your dream career at this point?
Well, I've mentioned animals and I've mentioned hospitality. So the two things I was most drawn to were either going into being a veterinarian, or being a doctor, like my dad, or opening a restaurant and being a restaurateur. None of those things were supported by my father for various reasons. So he did not
Even
want
the
me to
doctor.
follow.
You didn't
No,
want
he
to.
did not. No, he said, "Don't be a doctor." He just didn't want me to go into that business. It's also a business, and he loved restaurants, but he would tell me stories about, well, restaurants really have a high failure rate, and so he was very cautious in general. So he definitely discouraged me from
Yeah.
either career path. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I mean, yeah, I haven't
Hmm.
thought of medicine as a business, but it is. I also wanted to be
Yes.
a veterinarian when I was little, until my horse broke her leg and I got to see blood for the first time, and then it was over for me. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's the real deal.
yeah, it is the real
Yeah.
deal. So
Yeah.
what did your path take you after high school? What did you decide to do once you graduated?
I thought a lot about going into business for myself. I was always had an entrepreneurial spirit. So I was drawn to business school, and I felt like that would really help me build a foundation for anything that I decided to do in the future. And I ended up going to business school at the University of San Diego, and really had a great time there, learned a lot. And that really helped lay a strong foundation for a lot of little things that I took with me into my future.
So during your time at San Diego, were your first business ideas forming then, or were you going to jump right into entrepreneurship after college, or what were you looking for more for a job?
So it's funny, my ideas, my little ideas started even before that I went to college, and I had pitched this idea for, I don't know, it was a headband company. I had pitched the idea to a couple of my friends' parents who were in the fashion industry. And so I always kind of had little ideas in my head even before college. And after I graduated, I knew I just kind of wanted to learn, and take on any challenges that I could to grow. So I was open to different opportunities. The first job that I took, because I always liked spaces and hospitality, so I figured I should learn a bit about commercial real estate. And I worked for Grubb and Ellis and learned a lot from that team. But I was still in San Diego at the time, and really had a passion to move to Manhattan and to live in the big city. So that's what I did, on a whim, with no prospects, no job. My dad thought I was crazy. But I had a friend there, and she let me sleep on her couch. It's like that story you hear about people literally sleeping on couches in Manhattan. So I went through a recruiter to help me find a job, and based on some of my skill sets and some of the things I said that I liked, she actually got me an interview with a family of two CEOs. And they were looking for really an estate manager, personal assistant type person to run their lives. and they had a staff that I would run and multiple properties. It was a much bigger job than I probably should have had for someone of my age. But they offered me the job and they liked me and I liked them. And I learned more from running their lives than I could have ever learned in grad school. It was an incredible opportunity. They opened several of their own concepts. They were both successful entrepreneurs on their own before I started working for them. And I got to just learn all the things that you would, never get a chance to learn in another, job or in any other sort of school or anything like that. So it was a really great opportunity.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So what year was this, or how old were you when you're working for them?
So I believe I was 23, just turning 24 when I got this job. Again, much bigger job than I should have been given. I
Yeah.
somehow got it.
Yeah, but sometimes those opportunities align, and it sounds like you learned a lot from them. Were they in the hospitality space and the concepts they were opening?
So Candace Olson was in the .com world, and she was coming off of that world, and she had founded iVillage. And Peter Olson, her husband, was running Bertelsmann, which owned Random House Publishing. So they had, really interesting backgrounds. And then when he left Random House, they both started a company together that I helped get off the ground as well. So learned a lot of different skills through that process.
So is your time with them, this is really when you solidified, like, I want to do my own thing. I want to become an
Yes.
entrepreneur. I want to start my own business. And how did that progress over the years that you were working with them?
I mean, so when you're in a very corporate structured environment, there's a lot of checks and balances. You come in at a certain time, you leave at a certain time in general. And what your expectations are pretty clearly laid out. In a role like the one that I had, it was you have to be completely self-motivated in certain ways. And you also have to be just a figure it out type of person. Because you're going to get a variety of things thrown at you without any resources. You have to figure it out. You have to research. And I really enjoyed that. It was really fun for me. Long, long hours, but I got to travel. Things were interesting and different. It never felt stagnant. It always felt challenging. So a lot of those things I knew would carry over into starting my own business.
Yeah, some great skills. And so you mentioned you got to travel a lot with this role. I know
Mm-hmm.
this role, travel took you out of New York, right? Eventually.
Yes, it did. So a lot of the time I would be back and forth between New York and Colorado, which was really great because it's nice to take a break from the city. So at about year 6 of being in the city, I needed a bit of a break. And I was given an opportunity to just work remotely from Aspen, from one of the properties that they owned. And that's where I met my now husband. And I had always assumed I was going to be back in New York, probably opening some sort of concept there. But I ended up falling in love with Colorado and my husband. And so
Yeah.
I ended up staying, and it was the best decision because there was a lot of opportunity in the Denver area that we saw and we took advantage of.
So you end up in Aspen,
Yeah.
meet Dustin, you guys are now
Mm-hmm.
happily married, all that stuff, which we'll get to a little bit.
Yes.
But what was your next steps career-wise? Like, how did you part ways with the Olsons, and what were you going to pursue next?
Yeah. So that was it was a transition that they were, they wanted to hold on to me as long as possible, which is really sweet. So I slowly kind of backed off of my responsibilities, was working remotely and helping train someone to take over my role. There was a lot of information in my brain, so it took a while to fully integrate someone else. But while we were doing that, we were looking for spaces in Denver to open a coffee shop concept. I had this idea for a coffee shop. I knew how I wanted it to look. And I felt like Denver was ripe for something like that, on the heels of coming from a city like New York, and you see the elevated hospitality that's there at the time. And this was, about 11 years ago. Denver was totally different. So it really hadn't hit its stride yet with hospitality or concepts. And I saw the opportunity to bring something elevated to that city. And that's what I started to do, was just put it out there, created the business plan, and had an idea about what it might look like and how we might do it.
Yeah. And for the listeners that are familiar with Colorado, so this is going back to 2011, right? If I'm doing my math right?
2011. Yep.
Yeah. So Denver now is known for its coffee culture and competes with, Portland's and Seattle's, but at this point in time, not at all, right?
Not at all. No, there was very few options available, and nothing in the Highlands, low high area that we were living in. So it was a necessity as well as a dream. I felt so it was providing the community with something it needed, and also scratching that itch for me that I'd had since I was a kid.
So you've got this business plan, you've got an idea, you know what location of the city you're going to be in, which the Highlands, for those who are not familiar, is old Northwest Denver. At this time, it was a very just starting to become a redevelopment area. It wasn't the hot spot it is now. You also are deciding to go into business with what is Dustin at this time? Your fiance, your boyfriend, your husband. Where are you guys at with the relationship?
We were living together, but we were not engaged yet. That happened along the process. But yeah, it was a big decision, and I talk about this a little bit later. It was one of the challenges of being in business in general, is being in business with your partner. If you decide to do that, there are challenges along the way, but it made us stronger. So yeah.
So obviously with opening a coffee concept, you have to have a physical location, right? This is a location-based business. So tell us a little bit about how you picked the location and then what went into the actual build out, the opening of the first location.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't want to get woo woo on this, because I think there's a lot that goes behind opening a business, but there is intent that you put out there, and there is, focus. So once I was intent on opening something, I had my eyes peeled all the time for potential spaces. And it just so happened that a space did open up 2 blocks down from our house that we owned in the Lohi area. And I saw the sign go up one day saying "for lease." It was like a handwritten sign. It was not professional at all. And I went into the space next to it and asked about it. Turns out that the owners of that building were also running the bar next to it. So I got to I jumped on it very quickly, and I just asked the right questions at the right time, and happened to be able to capture that space pretty quickly after it was available. I will say I was probably just crazy enough to take it, because I mean, the space was not in good shape. They showed it to me, and it hadn't been in use for several years. It had layers of drop ceiling linoleum on the floor. They had plastered over all of the beautiful brick, because it was part of this older, historic brick building that had been around for a long time. At one point, it was the Coors Theater, so it was very historic. And I looked at it. The space was horrible, and I said, "I'll take it."
Did you have the vision? Could you see where it was going, or you felt it, or what?
I felt it. I could see past what they had done to it, and I knew that a historic building like this could be restored. I felt like we could peel off some of the plaster and get to that brick. I felt like that space really wanted to be revealed. And so that's the woo-woo part, but truly it turned out to be true. There was a lot of beauty underneath those layers.
Yeah. So what did you guys do? Obviously you had a lot of work cut out for you for opening that space. Did you do some of it your own? Did you have contractors? How did you fund all that? Obviously there's a lot of work to uncovering that beauty, right?
Yes. I'll take a step back and I'd never opened a coffee shop before. I didn't really know anything about the coffee industry. I just knew I loved coffee shops because of the way that they make you feel and how they provide a space for community and meetings and things like that. So we knew we needed to find a partner that had coffee experience. And we were lucky enough to be introduced to someone through another friend in the coffee industry who turned out to be a really perfect minority partner in the business. He had many years of coffee experience and he had wanted to open his own shop but couldn't. So he had some capital to bring to the table, and Dustin and I both had some capital. And I'll tell you how much we opened the space for in a little while. So we're not talking a lot of capital. We just happen to be resourceful. But because we only had a certain amount, we knew we had to do most of this, renovation ourselves. So literally myself, Dustin, and our partner, Greg, who I'm sure regretted signing the paperwork as soon as I put him to work. We had face masks and we were covered in plaster, but we really got our hands dirty and we did most of the renovation. I designed the entire space. I had Dustin build out tables. We tiled, we did everything. But it was so rewarding, especially coming off of being in Manhattan for so many years. And it was like this way of expressing myself and using my hands. And it was really, really fun project to do. And the only time we brought in contractors was when we needed, specific subs that had to have permits like electrical and plumbing. We didn't do that. But everything else we really did ourselves.
Yeah, the electrical and plumbing, sometimes you don't want to touch on your own, but it's interesting.
No.
Like I can hear almost the nostalgia in your voice of that time period and bringing you back to the build out. It's fun, right? It's fun to be a part of that creation.
It really was. And, there's businesses for every cycle of life, just like there's careers for every cycle of life. If you're an entrepreneur and, you have a dream, it might be perfect for a certain time in your life. And this particular one was perfect for that time of our lives. I didn't have children yet. And I was able to really just pour myself into it. And it was just like, it was like a dream that got to be revealed with all of our efforts. So it was pretty neat.
All right. So you've got the space, right? You're renovating it. You tease the listeners. You're going to tell them how much you did it for. So, but what are the next steps that you have to do to get the shop open?
Yeah. So, something to note. So the landlords were not willing to give us any tenant improvement, allowance, which means any money towards improving the space. What we were able to negotiate, though, was a year of free rent plus 6 months of very discounted rent, and then it ramped up very slowly. So, it sounds very like, oh, we just did this, but it was really important that we made sure that it was going to work. And we were very aggressive about asking for the most possible free rent and the most possible discount that we could on that lease. So, and we locked ourselves in with a 5-year, and we had a 5-year option after that. And we ended up having really great landlords. We really worked well together. But so, I would say to anyone, make sure you're really getting a good lease. If you can negotiate a good lease, do that. So we had this time to get the space built out. And we, had a little bit of capital. And in the meantime, we worked on the branding and really knew that we wanted to have a strong PR presence by the time we opened. I didn't hire an outside PR person. We just really worked hard on the branding, did our own social media, things along those lines, every step of the way. It became clear as we got closer to opening that we needed probably a little more capital to get the shop open. So we brought on a fourth partner who was a friend of mine who was already very successful in the hospitality industry. That was another very important move on our part, having a partner who was well-versed in coffee and having someone else who was already successful in the hospitality industry. And we raised another small amount of money to finish up the renovation and to get open.
I'm glad you brought up the PR piece too, because I was going to say, where our paths originally crossed is Al and I used to frequent the shop, and it felt like as a customer, even when you first opened, everybody already knew about you all in the city, right? Like the word of mouth and the PR was so present and so, like, I would say diverse across a lot of different networks all throughout the city. Like, how you mentioned social media, like, was there anything else that you did to really amp that up prior to opening and then as you were starting in your first couple of years?
Yeah, so we built a little tiny like coffee cart that was you could roll in and out of the space while we were building it out. And we brought it out front, during certain hours of the day, and we would provide cold brew coffee and hot coffee to anyone in the neighborhood. It was very simple, but it had our branding. And myself or Dustin, our partner Greg, would be out there. We would rotate, and we would talk to anybody that walked by, and just tell them, "Hey, we're going to be opening this shop. This is the projected date," and we would sell coffee. And the city let us get away with it. We never got in trouble. But that was a big deal. I think that helped a lot. So we were able to generate a lot of, um, you know, awareness, at least in our own neighborhood, about what we were doing.
Nice. So what was the official do you remember the official opening date of the shop?
Yes. Um, I believe we opened sometime in October of 2012. So it was, yeah. And it took us, I mean, gosh, it took a long time to get that shop open, longer than we thought. I think it was like a 9-month process to get it open. So, which is not surprising, knowing how, like, even now, if you have a space that's pretty close to ready to go, the permitting and all of that stuff and renovations just take time. So,
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't think contractors move any faster than that now. We know that,
not
right?
nowadays. No,
No.
no.
So you get to opening day. How does it feel? How does the launch go?
It was terrifying, to be honest with you. First of all, we spent so much money, getting the space open, having it look exactly how we wanted it to look. Had branded mugs, which was really important in the overall look and feel. But we had like zero working capital, so we didn't think that through very well. But you know what? We were like, we just have to get open and let's just make it work. So myself and Dustin and Greg, just in those first 4 months, really, it was just us. We didn't have any employees. We rotated different shifts, but we were actually far busier than we expected to be right off the bat. So there was no real soft opening because we had done such a good job of making sure people knew about us. We were busy pretty much right out the gate, and it just kept ramping. So yeah, I mean, it was exciting. It was fun. It was terrifying. It was all of those things. And we made many mistakes, and then we would just laugh and try again. So it was a fun time.
Did you know in those first couple months, you're like, all right, this is going to work. We made the right decision with the reception you had?
Yes, I had that feeling that, well, within 4 months, we were able to hire a barista. And then, 6 months, we hired another. So we could see our sales ramping up, and we could just feel the reception that we were getting was so positive. So yeah, I felt like we were doing the right thing.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
let's talk a little bit about the growth then, so
Hmm.
great reception your first year, it's going to work. Like, what are your next steps? What type of growth are you envisioning at that point in time? Like, let's say fast forward to like mid 2013.
Yeah, so this was both a challenge and a fun goal, but so essentially, you want to listen to your clients and your patrons, right? And you want to give them what they're asking for if you can, within reason. And everyone was asking us to have longer hours and to provide food. So we had thought, maybe down the line we would build out a kitchen. We didn't know it would happen so quickly because of the demand we were getting. We decided it was probably the right move. So we reinvested some of our funds into building out the kitchen in the back. We had a small little space for the kitchen, which we outgrew really quickly. So we had to build in the back. And that happened just faster than we thought. It was great, but that also brought more challenges because once that was built out, we needed 2 full-time people in the back to run the kitchen, more people to manage, and quickly we had 6, 7, 8 employees, and so that happened pretty quickly. Although it was a part of our overall vision, it just happened a little faster than we expected. Um, and then the other thing that happened was we did expand our hours. And, I'll say to anyone and this, being a business owner, sometimes you just got to try something to see if it will work. And we had a feeling based on what our feedback was that, gosh, it'd be great if you guys were open earlier. Gosh, it would be great if you were open later. So we figured with the food and then longer hours, we could really double our sales. And we did. We were one of the only coffee shops to be open at 6 a.m. I mean, Denver can be a little sleepy. At that point, there really wasn't anything open that early except for Starbucks. So we figure maybe we can, give it a try. And that first hour was so profitable because we could run it with one barista and people were there at the door at 6 a.m. So that was pretty cool to see that those were things that were starting to work for us.
Yeah. Yeah. I think listening to your customers is key in there, and also just like trying something. Like you could have expanded the hours. They couldn't have worked. You could have just condensed them back. Right.
Yep.
But it sounds like it turned out to actually be a key competitive advantage for the store.
It was. And, we made a conscious decision after looking around and seeing what was open around that time and thought, hey, if we can capture $500 in that first hour, why not? And so it was a good decision. We played with the closing hours several times, and ultimately we were back and forth between 5 and 6 p.m. I think we went back to 5 p.m. because we ended up doing some events at night too and renting the space out. So 5 o'clock ended up being a good time to close.
When we come back in just a moment, how Ali and Dustin have changes in their personal life that they need to balance while still building a quickly growing business. Stay with us. I'm Jessica Fialkovich, and you're listening to How I Sold.
Support for this show comes from Exit Factor. Have you ever wondered if your business is sellable? The truth is, thousands of businesses sell every year, from just a few $1,000s to billions. Now, there are a ton of experts that will teach you how to start a business, more on how to grow one, but only Exit Factor will teach you how to build a valuable and efficient business that is sellable at any time, no matter what happens. Visit exitfactor.com/pod to learn more about us and take our free assessment to find out if your business is sellable. That's exitfactor.com/pod.
Hey, welcome back to How I Sold. I'm Jessica Fialkovich. We're with Ali Elman, co-founder of Black Eye Coffee. Ali has leveraged her experience and mentors to apply lessons of hospitality, design, and PR to quickly launch one of Denver's favorite coffee shops. But changes in her personal life and more opportunity is about to hit her plate, and her and Dustin are going to have to figure out how to balance it all.
So the business is growing. You've added food, you're expanding hours, you got some staff, but I assume you're still working round the clock, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're working around the clock with your partner. So what's going on on your personal side? Like how are you managing between, working with your partner and working at home? And then you've got your own personal life that's probably developing too as the business is growing.
Yeah. I mean, that was definitely a challenge. One of the biggest challenges in any business is trying to, when you open your own business, to try to balance your life at all, which is, it's kind of a joke because your business does take over quite a bit, and you're excited about it, and you want to be a part of it as much as possible, and it tends to take up a lot of your brain power and everything else. So, my now husband and I had to kind of figure out what would work and when to turn off work and when to be, in relationship mode and not in business partner mode. And so we struggled with that a little bit, but ultimately ended up, it made us stronger as partners in general because we were able to work it out. Now, not everybody can, and that's totally fine because it's not easy, but that was a big challenge, and life doesn't stop, as you said. So during that time, we got engaged, we got married, and then eventually had 2 kiddos. So lots going on.
Yeah, lots to balance. So, like, let's see, what time period? We're probably like what, 15 going into 16 at this point, right? Yeah. So what are you guys thinking at that point with the business? How's everything going, and where do you guys see it taking off next?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I had my daughter in 2014, at the beginning of 2014, but didn't ever really slow down. I kept dreaming, and we had a lot of opportunity that kept coming to us. So that's something I would say. When you have a success, there's going to be a lot of people that want to not capitalize on it, but they're excited about it. So, oh, why don't you open another location here or here or here? We had a lot of different opportunities come to us. We did decide to expand the business to another location and do a full restaurant and bar. So that was also taking up quite a bit of time to focus on that. And we brought on other partners and in addition to the current partners for that. And given that I love hospitality and I like to bite off more than I could chew, I also was helping expand another concept during that time. It was something that someone had approached me with that I thought was a great concept, and I wanted to help her grow it. So I was kind of doing a lot.
Yeah. I mean, like, look, I think in the women entrepreneur community, we talk a lot about like people will be like, you have to have work-life balance and all this stuff. I mean, it doesn't sound like you had balance at all, right? At this point, you just had a lot going on.
I had a lot going on. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like, you have to remember, like, I thought it was fun. So if you think of something as fun, when it stops being fun, then you got to look at it. For me, I was having a great time, and I was helping businesses grow, and I felt like I was of service, and I felt like every day that I could go into my coffee shop and see people happy in there and enjoying themselves, like that really, selfishly, it fed me, and it made me really happy, and it was a lot of fun. So yeah, it wasn't all work.
Yeah. It's like, I was watching a show the other day, and they said, I'm happiest when I'm busy. Right. But if the busy is making you happy, then that's the point of life. Right.
It is. Absolutely. And you just have to know yourself and know your limits. And and everyone has them, which I did find out at some point.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, let's talk a little bit about that. So you've got, at this point, you've got the 2 locations open. You've got 1 young kiddo at home. I think probably Marlo's almost on the way at this point, right? After the 2nd location?
Not too long after. Yeah.
So when was the first time that you guys as partners or as a couple started thinking about selling the business or exiting? Was there a strategy that you had already pre-discussed about getting out at some point, or what were those kind of discussions like?
Yeah. So let's see here. So it was 2017 when we started to think that it might be, time to sell the business. At that point, I had, 6 brick and mortar locations of different hospitality concepts, 2 different concepts in 2 different states. And I had Marlo in 2017. And so, there's only so much energy you can give to really any one thing. And that 2nd kiddo really knocked me on my feet. And I thought I could keep going, but the lesson was like, you can only give so much of yourself at once and do it well. And that's when it started to not feel fun. And I think that myself and my partners were all kind of on the same page where we thought maybe it was time to sell. The business was doing well. Most of us were out of the day to day, really. We weren't running the day to day at all. In fact, I was living in California and our partner Greg was in Denver, but he wasn't in there, every day. So we had done a really good job of pulling ourselves back from the business day to day. It still takes up headspace. It's still something that you want to see successful, and it's still, it's a thing that you're responsible for, right? And so we all kind of decided that it was probably time to look at maybe selling, and we thought we could.
Yeah, I love how you guys pulled yourself out of the business. I mean, that's a really key thing that you need to do to increase the value. But how you talked about it's not like it goes away, right? There's this concept of owner absenteeism in the small business brokerage world. And I always say, I'm not a believer in full owner absentee, because that means you can shut off your brain. You can just say, hey, I don't care how this thing is going to run, which we all know as small and mid-sized business owners, that doesn't happen. Like our head hits the pillow every night with worries about the business, just like we have worries about our kids, right?
Correct. One bad review will send you into a tailspin. We worked really hard to have 5-star reviews, and so if I saw a bad review come through, it would be like, well, what's going on? What are we doing wrong? There's not enough oversight, and so just one of those can really be a huge disruption because you care. That's why you get into business, because you want to be involved. So we decided it was probably time for all of us to have a little more headspace. And so we started really thinking it was time and looking at our options for selling.
So what did you find those options to be when you started doing some research, and where did you go to for resources?
Yeah, well, gosh, we didn't have a whole lot of resources. The first option that we had looked at was selling to another person in the coffee industry who was looking to expand. And we got really far down the line in that deal. And then, as deals do, this one died kind of at the very end. So at that point, we knew we needed someone to help represent us. We did our own research and reached out to a bunch of different brokerages in the Denver area. And we're not successful with any of them because of the size of our business. So we were lucky enough to be introduced to Transworld at that point through my partner's wife, who was in I think a business women's group in Denver. I think with you, Jessica.
Yeah, probably.
At the time. Yeah. Maybe
Yeah.
she heard you speak or something. And she said, maybe you should try Transworld. And so that's the route we went. It was the best thing that we could have ever done. We were taken seriously, walked through the process. And it was actually, that process for me was pretty fun. Emotional, but fun.
Yeah. I think you touched on something I want to just expand on for our listeners too, is you mentioned size, right? So there's a big myth in the brokerage industry about size of business. And if you have to be a certain size to be sellable, tell me a little bit about what you learned through those conversations with the other brokers, and, if size does matter.
Yeah, well, according to these brokers that we spoke to, who, by the way, we had to chase them down to get them to speak to us at a coffee shop. They were not really interested, even though we were profitable, even though we had 5-star reviews, even though we had amazing press. They didn't take any of that into consideration. So they would tell us, well, you might be able to sell. That was the first thing we were told. Maybe, I'm not really sure. We really don't take businesses of this size. We were under $1 million. So really a lot of brokers don't want to waste their time helping small business owners. It was a real shame. So, but we were pretty confident that we could sell. We knew we could. We just had to find the right person to help us. So.
And that's why, that's why I do what I do. But like when we look at businesses across the US, almost 97% are under $1 million, right? So if we just said, hey, no business under $1 million could ever sell, there'd be no such industry as mergers and acquisitions. There just wouldn't be enough deals to go around. So it's a huge misconception.
It really is. And I should back up and tell everyone that we ended up opening this business for about $150,000. So, in the grand scheme of things, not a ton of capital that we raised. It wasn't like we had, a ton of outside investors, or we were beholden to a big hospitality group or something like that. We really bootstrapped it. And given that I think we ended up selling at year 6, we started paying ourselves that first year pretty quickly. All of the partners were being paid. Then we sold for a really nice multiple. So that's a success. It's a small business, but that's a success. So,
big success.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
People get discouraged, I think, because they think, where do I start? And I have to have all this money. And you don't necessarily have to have all of those things to make a small business successful.
No, it's so true. So you mentioned you had a lot of fun in the deal process, which is, I wouldn't say rare, but it's stressful, it's emotional, but it can be fun. What did you learn throughout selling the business? What was that period like for you?
Well, so I was the partner most involved. So I was speaking to our broker on a regular basis, or his analyst, and we were going through our books and making sure that everything that was on there should be. There were certain ad backs that we backed out of, and I actually really enjoyed the process of digging into our business a bit more and telling the story, because it was an easy story for me to tell. And that's a big part of selling your business, is being excited to tell the story. Honestly, I think that that's why our business was so sellable as a coffee shop, because there was so much to tell, and there was a lot of excitement around it. And I think because I'm going to be honest, at that point, I had an 8-month-old, 6 to 8 months around that time. That was my second child, multiple businesses. So I was definitely burnt out. but I will say that retelling the story and getting excited for somebody else to carry it on, like, that was actually pretty fun for me, because it reminded me of why I got into the business in the first place, which can be tough for a lot of business owners when they're tired.
Yeah. Well, that's a really key point too, is letting yourself be in that excitement again as you're going through this deal process. Cause the people that are going to acquire the business, like, they're going to feed off that excitement. Right. And in those conversations you had, so you guys were ultimately successful, but tell us a little bit about, like, the closing process, like the buyer. Did you feel, like, super comfortable in the transition and everything? How did that go?
Yeah, so we actually had quite a bit of interest in this business, despite what the other brokers had said. We had a lot of different buyers that I spoke to, and the challenge was really trying to find somebody that I felt comfortable taking over the space, and taking over with our employees that we were all pretty close with. Keeping it a secret was also tough, because, as you know, our whole retail storefront was glass. So even at night, when we would have potential buyers do a walkthrough, we'd have neighbors waving, and we would have, baristas hanging out at the bar next door, kind of peeking in, like, what are they doing? And so it was, that was a challenge for sure. And, I don't like to lie. So it was a little awkward, and we'd have to say, oh, was it, a wine vendor or something like that? When they would ask, oh, what were you guys doing in the space last night? And it seemed odd to them, because we weren't around day to day. And then suddenly here we are in the space at night all the time. So that was a little interesting. And then, just finding someone I thought had the business acumen to take the business to the next level, which is ultimately who we found. And she had a very analytic brain versus, like, the very creative brain. So I thought, well, she's got the foundation for the creativity of a space. Now she just has to take it and make the margins better. And she had a lot of great ideas. So I was happy ultimately that we ended up with the buyer we did.
Yeah. You already built the creative playbook. Like, really, she could just duplicate that, almost like a franchise type thing, and just take the business and grow it. So what was the day after like? So you close the business, next morning you wake up, it's no longer yours. What's that day like for you?
That was a mixed emotion day for sure, because, a lot of the excitement you have around anything is, like, the process of the deal, or the process of getting something, the process of the goal. So then we had reached our goal and it was amazing. And we all got a nice payout. Um, and it was it was a mixed emotion thing though, because this particular concept, I had a lot of myself in there.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of emotion. I mean, physically, I had built the space. So like a lot of my identity was probably wrapped up in that space and it meant a lot to me. And so it was a little bit odd, but you know what? I got over it pretty quickly. I
Yeah,
got
you were
over it
ready.
quickly. I was ready. Yeah, I was ready. And, it was time. And I have so many amazing memories of that space and that time, but it was time for me to let it go so I could, free up my own space.
So what learning lessons did you have, after that day after? What kind of reflections or learning lessons did you have, either business or personal, about the whole sale process and building a business as a whole?
Yeah. So after the dust settled a little bit, there was time for me to reflect on the value of my time and how much time and work it took into this project. And, was it all worth it? It absolutely was in this case, 100% in my opinion. But it's really good to kind of be clear, I think, when you go into business about what you want to get out of it and whether that's a little more freedom, whether that's a creative endeavor and some way to express yourself, or whether that is truly to you know triple quadruple your initial investment, whatever that is. Just to be clear about it, we jumped into this head first, and I didn't have a clear vision of what we wanted to do, but it was 100% exactly what we should have done at the time.
Yeah, it seems like you got a few things out of it, though, that you probably, even though you weren't clear in it, that you were searching for. Like you mentioned, like missing the creativity and missing the community out of New York, and that's when you were in New York, and that's really what you ended up building, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you've got two young kids at home. Obviously, you still have your relationship, but I know you're not the type of person to sit still. So, was there a plan for what's next, after you sold the coffee brand, or what was what's next for you?
So I at the same time was selling my ownership in another concept to my partner at the time. I was just ready to not have. I mean, gosh, I had like over 60 employees at one point between all of these hospitality concepts, which was hospitality can be brutal when it comes to at times. I mean, it's super fun, but there was always somebody calling out sick or something. So I was just kind of ready to not have those phone calls anymore. And so I knew my plan was just to take 6 months. I sold all of my ownership. It was the perfect time to do it. I got to, um, really reap the rewards of all the hard work and just like settle in for a little bit. And I say I wasn't working, but I had a 10-month-old. So if
Yeah,
you
you were.
spent time with
Yeah.
a 10-month-old, it was a lot of work. Yeah. And I knew that whatever I did next, I wanted it to feel like I was a part of something that was supporting the small business community in some way. But I also wanted to be a part of a team that I could learn from. And that was important to me.
Yeah. So this is where our stories really intersect. Obviously, like
Mhm.
I was a customer of yours and you were a customer of mine. And
Mhm.
then eventually our paths crossed where you joined Transworld with Dustin. So staying in business with your husband, first as team members and then as partners. So tell the audience from your perspective, like how did you feel like business brokerage fulfilled that desire to serve small business owners, and kind of where that journey has brought you today?
Yeah. So, I mean, as I mentioned, I actually really enjoyed the process. As I said, I really enjoyed working with Al, your husband and partner, on that deal. And when I saw the opportunity come up for the director of operations role, I mean, everything I'd done was really operations. I created concepts, but I was in the background doing operations. So it was everything that I was comfortable doing. And I was really excited to join a team like this that I felt, not only could I bring what I knew about small business, I could also learn from the team, and be a part of something. And to be able to watch, a team of brokers literally every day go out there and try to help businesses sell that are told they can't, many of them, it's so rewarding, and it's truly life-changing for everyone involved. So it felt like it had a purpose, being a part of Transworld. So it was the perfect place to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And you guys both provided so much growth to the company, to bring us where we're at today. So tell our listeners, like, what are you doing today? What do you see as the next steps for your future forward?
Yeah. So I went from director of operations to VP of operations to partnering to help expand into the Dallas-Fort Worth area for Transworld. And so my husband and I are now out here in Dallas, just outside of Dallas, and excited to get to know the business community here and to see what we can do to help support them. There is, I don't know how many more businesses there are out here, but there are a lot. So we feel like we can be of service. And so that's a big part of why we get up every day, is to be of service. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I know this podcast was also of service to a lot of people, inspiring, hearing about building, especially for those that are familiar with Black Eyed, like, you guys really built this brand that, like I said, was so well known across Denver. And to hear the story of how you built it with your own blood, sweat, tears, your own hands, only $150,000. I know that's inspiring and of service to even our listeners there. Before we go into the last question, tell our listeners, if they want to learn more about you, connect with you, or if they're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, learn more about Transworld and how to sell their business, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on LinkedIn. Alexandria Elman is my name on LinkedIn, but you can email me directly at aelman@tworld.com. aelman@tworld.com. I'm happy to help.
Awesome. And we'll drop that into the show notes too. So Ali, wrap up every episode with the last question is, if you could wrap your whole journey of building a company, selling a company, wrap that into one piece of advice or one quote that you would offer to other small business owners, what would that be?
Oh, geez, this was a tough one. There's a lot of advice that I'd want to give, but there's books for that, right? There's a lot of books. So here's what I'll say, and then I'll wrap up with the quote that I always go back to. If you want to start a business, get great advice from other business owners in all industries, and take the nuggets out of that advice that you get, but ignore the naysayers and go for it, because there's always going to be a ton of naysayers. And we had that as well when we were talking about our concept. And don't be afraid to fail, because the biggest failures in my life have turned out to be the biggest blessings. And don't be fooled by what success looks like from the outside, because it took many failures to get to that success. And anyone that's a success in business will tell you that. And so I'll wrap it up with my favorite quote, which is, success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts.
I love that. Ali, thank you so much for sharing your story and being on How I Sold today.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you so much for having me.
That's Ali Elman, co-founder of Black Eyed Coffee. This entrepreneur has changed how we look and interact with multiple brands and industries, and I know she'll make an impact on the M&A world for years to come. Hey, thanks so much for listening to the show this week. If you want to support us, spread the word by subscribing on your favorite podcasting app or YouTube. You can also leave us a 5-star review and post about us on social media. We really do appreciate it. If you'd like to learn more about How I Sold or want to apply to be on the show, go to howisold.co. I'm Jessica Fialkovich, and you've been listening to How I Sold.
Thank you for listening to How I Sold, presented by Exit Factor. Please follow us on your favorite podcasting app so you don't miss an episode. Another way to support the show is by leaving a review. Find more information about How I Sold and Exit Factor, including how to be on the show, at www.exitfactor.com/howisold.